Hi, gang. We're going to work today on analyzing primary sources so that we can answer the question, what should history say about the Aztecs? So our learning targets. I can research, organize, and evaluate information from primary and secondary sources to create a historical narrative. And I can analyze primary sources and secondary sources using SCAPPT. All right, here we go. So we're trying to answer this central question, and historians are always answering questions. What should history say about the Aztecs? So when we're doing this, we need to compare and contrast multiple accounts, multiple stories or perspectives. So things to consider when we're analyzing those documents. What is the author's perspective or point of view? What is his or her message? Is this a reliable person? This is that authority claim test, right? Do they have authority to talk about this issue? And is there other evidence that corroborates the source? And corroboration, you'll often hear it on like Law and Order kind of shows. What's the corroborating evidence? This is evidence that tells the same story, maybe from a different perspective. So this is being able to verify or confirm a theory, a statement, or a finding in more than one source. So we're going to look at this document. First of all, hey, guess what? This is your textbook, which you don't have, but this is the passage from your textbook about Cortez and Montezuma and their meeting in Mexico City for the first time. So basically it says, a small group of conquistadors led by Hernan Cortez reached Mexico in 1519. They were looking for gold. Hearing of this arrival, the Aztec emperor Montezuma II believed Cortez to be a god. According to the Aztec legend, the god Quetzalcoatl was to return to Mexico in 1519. Cortez resembled the god's description from the legend. Thinking that this god had returned, Montezuma sent Cortez gifts, including gold. With getting more gold as his motive, Cortez marched to the Aztec capital, and when he got there, Montezuma welcomed him. But Cortez took the emperor prisoner. So that is what your textbook says about that initial meeting. So some questions we need to ask. Is this a primary or secondary source? Well, if we look at the pink down at the bottom, this is a secondary source. This is coming from your textbook and is written by historians. Then we've got to ask, who was Hernan Cortez? Well, it says at the top, he was a conquistador who arrived in Mexico in 1519. That means he was coming from Spain. Who was Montezuma II? Well, it says here in the passage, he was emperor of the Aztec Empire. And then what happened when they met? So what happened when they met was that Cortez marched into the Aztec capital and took Montezuma, his prisoner. So how do we know this account is true? Well, again, we have to corroborate or confirm this statement, theory, or finding. So we're going to practice this doing some SCAPPT practice. All right, so here's a letter from to King Charles from Cortez describing that meeting. So let's see what Cortez had to say. After being seated, Montezuma spoke as follows. We learned from our ancestors that those of us who inhabit this region descend from strangers who came from a very distant land. We have also learned that the prince brought our people into these parts and then returned to his native land. Much later, the prince returned to this region and found that his people had intermarried with the native inhabitants. When he asked them to return to him, they were unwilling to go, nor were they willing to see him as their leader, so they left. We have always heard that his descendants would come and conquer this land. From what you say of the great king you sent here, we believe that your king is our natural leader, especially because of the direction from which you say you have come, and because you say that you first learned of us a long time ago. Therefore, be assured that we will obey you and that you have the power in this land to command what is your pleasure, and it shall be done in obedience and all that we have at your disposal. And since you are in your own proper land and your own house, rest and refresh yourselves after your journey. This was letter by Hernan Cortez to Charles V, written in 1520. So first we got to summarize it. This is a letter, like I said. According to Cortez, The Spanish were being expected by the Aztecs. He says, we've always heard that the descendants would come conquer this land, the descendants of that god. The context of this, remember, you have to look globally and historically and geographically. This is the age of exploration. There's a global competition for territory and resources. This is about 30 years after Christopher Columbus arrived in the New World, and it's 1520, which is a year after Cortez lands in Mexico. You also see this when you look at the sourcing information at the bottom. The intended audience is King Charles of Spain, which you can find at the bottom as well. The purpose, I can assume, since he's writing to the king, who is essentially his boss, is to explain how things are going. So he's going to kind of want to paint himself in a positive light. And you see that in his point of view as well. He is motivated to find riches and make a name for himself. God, gold, and glory. Gold and glory were big driving forces for European exploration of the New World. Therefore, be assured that we obey you, and that all is in your command and will be done in obedience. So you can see he's making a name for himself. So the tone by Cortez is boastful. All right, so now that we have seen those things, we need to reflect. According to this document, what did Montezuma say to Cortez? Or rather, the textbook. According to the textbook, it said that Montezuma predicted a god would come, but that was all it said. Document A corroborates some of that textbook account, but it might not be the most reliable source because it's coming from Cortez, who is motivated to boast for himself and show his fame and his glory and his riches. So it might not be the best example to corroborate that story. It's a good example and we should absolutely use it, but it shouldn't be where we stop. We need to keep digging. So now we're going to do that. Go for it.